Ladies and gentlemen, now today, thanks to the hard work of legendary data miner Otrix, we're going to be breaking down the full abilities and also synergies for Mr. Fantastic. Now, this character looks insanely quirky, man. There is so much weird stuff for the synergies and also his pre-fight ability, being able to not only affect him, but also other teammates as well. So there are so many questions for Mr. Fantastic about how he's going to function and affect other characters, but a lot of exciting stuff. I must say, like, coming from the Doom breakdown before, between like Mr. Fantastic and Doom, I'm slightly more looking forward to Mr. Fantastic just because there is so much potential with some of the stuff that this character has. Like, on his own, he looks really, really good, but also there's just all sorts of weird stuff that we're going to have a bit of a chat about and talk about some of the potential functions there. But let's get into the base abilities. So as a passive, he has a stack of physical and energy resistance, 900 on a fully maxed out 5-star. So, you know, nothing too insane, but a nice little bonus there. And also he has a 5% chance to evade for each non-damaging debuff on either champion, but this does not trigger during a well-timed block. So I'm curious to see if there are going to be like any scenarios where you gain like so many like non-damaging debuffs that this stacks up to give you like 100% chance to evade. There's got to be like some sort of cheese node or interaction for this one, but yeah, I'm curious to see how this one's gonna work. But the fact that it doesn't trigger on it during a well-timed block is really good, meaning that your like parries won't go to evade, which is always very nice as well. And also Mr. Fantastic gains a small amount. It's like 5% of his base attack rating for each debuff on the opponent, but it looks like you can apply a lot of debuffs to the opponent, so this looks like it's going to be quite a nice thing for kind of scaling up his damage there. And then we've got Prepared for Anything, his pre-fight ability. So before the fight, you can choose up to 3 unique debuffs to place on the opponent at the start of the next fight, and each debuff costs 1 persistent charge. Mr. Fantastic is going to start with 2 persistent charges and can store up to 5. When he finishes a fight, he gains 1 persistent charge for each unique debuff on the opponent when that fight finishes, I assume. So the debuffs each last 12 seconds and a refresh when the opponent is knocked down. However, and this is a big line here, the debuffs are applied even if a different champion enters the fight. So even if you don't play with Mr. Fantastic, you can still load up some of these debuffs to use on other characters, and it looks like even on other characters you can refresh them by knocking your opponent down with either a heavy attack or a special attack. So I think some of these debuffs, man, are going to open up like a fair bit for certain characters. So debuff potency scales with the rarity of Mr. Fantastic. If different versions of a debuff are applied, only the strongest one triggers. So if we have a look at these 3 debuffs that you can select, and again, when you start a quest, you can only pick 2, but I assume like once you win your first fight, you can get 3 every other fight then. So the first one, and this is a really big one for like opponents with a lot of debuffs, there is a Petrify, which reduces the effectiveness of regeneration and power gain by 35%. Now, the reason this is so potentially big is you can give any champion Petrify by the look of it. So a champion like Massacre, where if you're playing aggressively, you can maybe get like 30, 40 incinerates. With the Despair Mastery, you just need like 1 Petrify to get that heal reversing. That could open up some crazy windows for champions, man. So I'm very, very excited about that one. And the next one suppresses the opponent, decreasing their defensive power rate by 22% there, so you can make any matchup like a bit easier to deal with if there are really annoying special attacks there, which sounds pretty cool. And then we've got Debuff Siphon on the opponent, increasing the potency of damage over time debuffs on them by 22% and reducing the potency of those effects on allies by the same amount. So that increases damage over time debuffs there. Again, like we were saying with Massacre, you can get like a lot of incinerates, and with the Petrify, and also this could potentially be like pretty mad for certain champions, man. These are big buffs that can interact with all sorts of different mechanics. So yeah, the pre-fight ability seems really, really cool. I like that it can affect other champions as well. That just seems a little bit mad, but also very, very exciting. Now, the next kind of mechanic he has is something called Careful Study. So when the opponent activates a special attack, you place an indefinite Careful Study debuff on them for that specific special attack. So a Careful Study debuff lowers the attack rating of each hit in the special attack by 25%, and if Mr. Fantastic was struck by the last hit of that special attack, you gain one additional copy of that debuff as well. However, all copies of the debuff are purified when the opponent activates a different special attack than the one triggered by that debuff. And when the opponent has 3 copies of a Careful Study debuff, so assume when you are fighting against them, they are combined into a passive that lasts for the rest of the fight and the next 5 fights the opponent participates in. So I think even if you die, you still get your Careful Study like debuff back when you re-enter the fight there. I think that's how it works, at least to the best of my knowledge. And also Careful Study passives count as 3 debuffs for Reed's other abilities as well, and each passive prevents future matching Careful Study debuffs. So I think that like prevents it from getting taken away by the opponent using like a different special attack, but honestly I'm not really too sure specifically about the wording on that one. Now here's where it gets like a little bit interesting, is really with the Awakened ability, because the Awakened ability, Mr. Fantastic's offensive power rate is increased by 50% for each Careful Study passive on the opponent. So I think if you got 3 of them active, that's like 150% additional offensive power gain, at least the best of how I'm understanding this at the moment. But that seems like a little bit too good to be true, because if you can have that up like all the time, that's mad. That is so much additional power gain there. So I'm actually like so excited by the potential of that. If it works the way that I think it's going to work, that is going to be so good. But also the Awakened ability, Mr. Fantastic gains an additional flat 20% chance to evade any unblockable attack, and this increases by 3% every time the opponent starts an unblockable hit, and it's capped at 50% for basic attacks. But I don't think it has a cap for special attacks by the look of it. But yeah, I mean, if you've got this for unblockable, and then with all the non-damaging debuffs, maybe you can go up to like an additional like 50% chance on your base to evade. Maybe there's some pretty funky stuff that could happen in the right matchup there. But yeah, I'm curious to see how all this stuff is going to function. But the evade, it seems like it's going to have its uses and also applications there. So moving past Careful Study, and again the kind of point of that seems to be to get like debuffs on the opponent for additional damage, and also increase your power gain by like an absolute ton with the Awakened ability. But your heavy attacks with Mr. Fantastic as well not only refresh the pre-fight debuffs, but also pause them for 3 seconds, and special attacks, if no pre-fight debuffs were selected, so I assume if you're fighting Mr. Fantastic, special attacks are always going to be unblockable, but you can have that additional bit of utility if you need it, which does seem quite nice there. And then we got the Special Attack 1. So the Special Attack 1 has a couple of different debuffs that applies to the opponent. So you got 100% chance to taunt the opponent for 9 seconds. Taunted opponents have a 70% higher chance to activate a special attack, but the taunt is removed when the opponent does activate any special attack there as well. However, the special one also applies a stagger effect as well, which is a little bit rare to see on a science champion. However, it's like a mega stagger, so if you stagger something, it gets rid of that buff, and any other buff that would be triggered at the same time will be immediately nullified. So for a matchup like the champion, for example, this could be really good, like make Mr. Fantastic an effective counter to that. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this one's going to function. Now, with the Special 2, I'm kind of interested to see how this one functions. So when you activate the Special 2, you re-trigger Mr. Fantastic's selected pre-fight debuffs once each. So I'm not too sure if this means you can stack up like multiple debuffs of the Special 2, because if you can, that is going to elevate Mr. Fantastic to a level of insanity there. The heal reversal potential, man, if you can get multiple petrifies and keep on stacking them up and refreshing them, could be mad. So I'm very interested to see like exactly how this is going to function. But yeah, we'll have to see on that one, because that sounds like it could be crazy. But if you can only have like one of every single pre-fight debuff, then it really isn't going to be like that exciting, because the only other thing the Special 2 does is shock the opponent, dealing a reasonably small amount of energy damage. I think it's about 60% of his base attack, so nothing like super exciting there. So yeah, but if we get multiple debuffs off the Special 2, man, that could be an absolute banger there. And finally, with the Special Attack attack 3. So if the opponent has at least one debuff, gain a passive fury for 20 seconds, increasing attack rating by roughly about 20% of his base attack for each debuff on the opponent. And I think you can fairly easily get about 7 or 8 debuffs, maybe like a little bit more in the right scenario. And if the special attack too, you can refresh that, then that's going to be really, really, really good. So 20-second Fury, like, it's a fair amount of duration as well, especially if you have, like, the massive amount of, like, offensive power gain with the Awakened ability, and that kind of functions the way I think it's going to function. But again, there are so many questions when it comes to Mr. Fantastic as to, like, how good this champion is going to be, but I think, like, he's got a lot of solid potential, not only for himself, but also for the other characters, and we haven't even gotten to the synergies yet. And there's some very interesting stuff in the synergies. So let's quickly cover the base stats and then go on to synergies. So crit rating is all right, man. It's certainly not too bad at just under 24%, but on a fully maxed out 5-star, nothing super special there. Crit damage rating is slightly below average, unfortunately, not even 185% there. However, he does have slightly above average block proficiency at 65.1%. So overall, like, his base stats, they aren't terrible, but they're like nothing special. However, he does have decent block proficiency, which is always like good for a champion to have. Moving on to the synergies, the first one we've got is with the other members of the Fantastic Four, and I don't think this affects Mr. Fantastic, but does affect the other 3. So if they start the fight below 20% health, they heal for 10% over 6 seconds. Otherwise, they gain 60% of a bar of power over 6 seconds. So a nice little bonus there, nothing like super insane. Then we got the big Fantastic Four synergy. So this one, at least in my opinion, it reads a little bit underwhelming. Maybe in practicality it's going to be a little bit more exciting, but so you need all the champions in the team, all of the Fantastic Four, to get any of these benefits. Just keep that in mind. So whenever you gain a rock stack, you gain an additional one. It's okay for like damage ramp up, but you know, it's nothing on the champion synergy there. So is still going to be very much like a champion, like Heimdall, Hela, Angela synergy if you want to really get the most out of him, I would assume there. Human Torch, Incinerate and Nova Flame duration increased by 30%. Like, that's pretty solid for Human Torch because a lot of his damage, especially when you ramp up the smolder, does come from those damage over time sources. So that one's not too bad for Human Torch, but again, nothing like super crazy there. Invisible Woman, invisibility only has a 15% chance to unpause during a well-timed block. And this one, at least to me, it does seem like a little bit useless, just due to the fact that if you're ramping up Invisible Woman and you want the big damage, you don't want to risk that your invisibility is going to get unpaused there. If there was like a guaranteed no chance that it was going to unpause, this would be so good. This would be a game changer for Invisible Woman, but there is this chance to unpause and lose all your damage ramp up, so it's just a bit rubbish, at least in my opinion. Very unreliable there. So yeah, that one just doesn't seem like very exciting or very useful there. And finally, the one with Mr. Fantastic, I think could be really good. So for each unique debuff on the opponent, they take 4% of Mr. Fantastic's current attack as direct damage per second. And again, we kind of figured out that you can get like 7, maybe 9 debuffs at any one time. So this could be like really good for Mr. Fantastic, especially if it like scales up with the Fury as well. So I think there's a bit of interesting potential with the synergy there. Overall, I wanted the synergy to be a little bit more for all the characters involved, but it doesn't seem too bad for certain champions, like a nice little bonus there. But I just want something a little bit crazier. But also Mr. Fantastic with the Invisible Woman, debuffs last 25% longer, so this is just going to be great for kind of refreshing everything. And again, if you can stack up the debuffs of the special too, just a really fun time. Now he also has the synergy called Council of Reeds, which increases his attack rating by apparently a flat 30% for each other Mr. Fantastic on your team. So I think if you got, you know, say you had the 6-star one, the 5-star one, 4-star, 3-star, maybe the 2-star as well. I don't know if you can get like an additional 120% attack from this, but if you can, it could be really good. Again, you need to sacrifice the the full fantastic 4 team synergy, and it would somewhat like limit your utility there, but who knows. I don't know, man. There's some potential. This is like a really weird synergy, but it sounds like pretty exciting as well, so I'm curious to see how that one is gonna work out, man, because it just seems like really wacky. And then we've got college rivals with Dr. Doom. So Mr. Fantastic gains 5% of his max power each time a buff is nullified or its duration expires off the opponent. So I think this could be quite good in certain matchups there, depending on like how like big already his base power gain is, because it seems like with the awakened ability you're already going to have a lot of power gain there, so maybe not super necessary. But also with Dr. Doom, gives him an armor break on his heavy attack for 10 seconds, reducing armor rating by 15%. So that adds like a really nice piece of utility to Dr. Doom there for certain matchups. So yeah, I don't think that synergy is like completely terrible. Might have some interesting uses in the right scenario there, and gives a bit more to Dr. Doom. However, these synergies, man, are very interesting, the shared knowledge ones. So he has 3 different shared knowledge synergies, and you just need an activating champion, and then it seems to affect every like Cosmic and Skill champion, Tech and Science, and Mutant and Mystic. So these are the activators for Cosmic and Skill, and if you have one of these champions, Cosmic and Skill champions basic hits pause 1 of each buff on them for 0.2 of a second. So I'm very curious to see like all the interactions with this, because there seems to be a fair bit to it. Like even with Hyperion, man, if you can like pause that power gain and just keep it like going and going and going, then you can start getting like the Fury buffs even without the special 3 and get a lot more value off it. So I'm curious to see like what champions this is going to work really well with, but Cosmic champions are certainly known for their buffs, and even characters like Aegon in the skill class. This could be really good for retaining some Furies, especially like the Fury when you get smacked as well. So again, I'm just curious to see how this one functions, because it looks like it's going to be a solid way to like pause buffs on your characters, but you can only pause like 1 of each buff. So yeah, I don't know how good that's going to be, but I imagine it's got like its synergies and combos there. And then we have the Tech and Science champion one with Sentry, She-Hulk, Vulture, and also Dr. Octopus. So She-Hulk and Doc Ock, again, like very good champions, very commonly played as well. So Tech and Science champions debuffs also apply an indefinite power sting, dealing direct damage equal to 60% of their attack rating when the opponent activates a special attack, and this power sting can stack up to 3 times there. So I'm not really too sure exactly how this is going to work or function, but I think it's got a lot of potential, especially for very debuff heavy champions, because that is a big power sting, like 60% per debuff that you apply. You can stack it up to 3 times. So for a champion like Human Torch, like every single combo where you apply like 3 incinerates, that's 180% of your attack rating every time the opponent detonates, and you could have like full fantastic 4-team synergy, and also like putting She-Hulk on the team or Dr. Octopus there. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential with this one, man. I'm very curious to see like what champions it works really well with, but hey, I see that one being very, very useful there. And finally, we have the shared knowledge genetics of Mutant and Mystic characters. None of the characters with this one are really that great. You got Psylocke, Storm, Doctor Strange, Loki, or maybe a little bit dead weight in comparison to other options, but I guess there are occasional uses for like most of them down there. So Mutant and Mystic champions regain 5% of the power they've spent on any special attack for each unique special attack they've used in the fight. So if you use a special 1, a special 2, and a special 3, that is a 15% reduction to all of your specials for the rest of the fight, which certainly isn't too bad. I think it's going to have some really interesting interactions with certain characters, like mainly your God tier Mutant and Mystic champions. I'm thinking about champions like Havoc, Sunspot, maybe Domino as well, maybe a bit of Namor, like characters that just, you know, deal so much damage from their special attacks, because I think this does seem like a pretty powerful synergy. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this one interacts, man. But overall, he has a lot to his synergies. There's certainly a lot going on, and in terms of the base stuff and also the pre-fight ability that can not only affect him, but also other characters in your team. There is so much like theory crafting, testing to do with Mr. Fantastic. So I'm very excited about the release of this champion, man. He looks like an absolute banger. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think about Mr. Fantastic in the comment section below, and which one of the two brand new champions are you most excited for, Mr. Fantastic or Dr. Doom? But anyway, mad love to our guy Otrix. Smash that like button if you did enjoy today's video breakdown. Take care, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic day.